Hola, mi gente. I'm Liz, the founding director of FLAC, the Festival of Latin American Contemporary Choreographers. We are based in Yelamu, the unceded territory of the Ohlone Ramaytush people, in what is now called San Francisco, California. As Latino, Latina, and indigenous dance artists of the Americas, FLAC is responding to what it means to be an artist during a time of genocide. Our curatorial theme for our 11th annual festival is El Grito por Taura, a cry for revolution. El Grito meaning the scream or cry in Espanol, for Taura meaning revolution in Arabic, showcases artists in transnational solidarity representing social justice issues that center local, immigrant, queer, feminist, and indigenous perspectives that extend to Palestine. Leading up to the festival this November, FLAC is hosting community care discussions and workshops by local BIPOC dance makers, scholars, and activists. Today, we're joined by Leila Mire, one of FLAC's featured choreographers this November, in an interview by Leyya Mona Tawil. Leila is a researcher, performer, choreographer, community organizer, and educator. She is a current PhD candidate at UC Berkeley in the Theater, Dance, Performance Studies program and is an alumni of New York University and George Mason University. Her research looks at how dance is co-opted, appropriated, and performed for state and anti-imperial interests, particularly as it pertains to Palestine and its occupation. Mire writes for Thinking Dance and is part of the Decolonizing Dance Writing Project. She continues to perform as a freelancer and is a member of the Al Juthor Dabka troupe. Leila Mire, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the El Grito podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Leyya Mona Tawil is an artist, curator, and cultural activist. She works in sound, dance, and hybrid performance. Tawil is a Syrian Palestinian American engaged in the world as such. She is the director of Arab AMP, a platform for experimental music, live art, and ideas from the Swana diaspora and their allied communities. Tawil is on the curatorial team of the Arab American National Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, Southern Exposure in San Francisco, and is the director of TAC, Temescal Art Center in Oakland. Leyya Mona Tawil, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to El Grito.
Thank you, Liz. A very big pleasure to be here with you and with Leila.
And to our audience, welcome to From Resistance to Co-optation, Dance in the Context of Palestine, which explores the dual nature of dance as both a powerful tool for resistance and in other contexts as an imperialistic tactic used to advance the settler colonial agenda. This discussion will touch on the role of Zionism in modern dance, indigenous dances of resistance, and the obfuscation of the art's radical capacity to render them impotent in political moments or urgency. Welcome.
Hmm.
Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Liz.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Leila.
Hey Leah, how's it going?
It's good. I'm at TAC, Temescal Art Center in Oakland. Where are you calling in from?
I am calling in from our shared office space.
Right on.
So it's blurred because there are boxes in the background.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm really excited to talk to you today on this topic, on our many topics that we're going to cover. Um, I'm just going to launch right into it and we'll get to all the places we need to go together. So, I know you and I know your work slightly, but I'm using this as an opportunity to get to know you more. And so I'd really love to hear from you how you describe yourself as an artist and as a scholar today, and Can you talk a little bit about your journey into where you are now as a PhD candidate, as a performer, as a maker?
Yeah, for sure. I think that we actually met like years ago, and I thought you lived in New York the whole time because you were always traveling. And that was right out of college, actually, when we first met. But I think it's always I think this is the hardest question to answer for some reason, like way harder than like a dissertation question is like, how do you describe yourself? Because I don't really I always just deflect it onto something else, and I'm like, oh, let's talk about anything else. Um, but I kind of grew up in the concert dance scene, and I also grew up doing like more cultural dance. But I never really merged them when I was growing up. It was something that was pretty bifurcated. I grew up in Tennessee, and I did contemporary dance. But I saw like Debke and these other cultural forms as something that existed kind of as part of my culture, but not part of my dance, because I think that was kind of the culture of the time. It was also, post 9/11 Tennessee of all places. And then I went on to study dance in college. And that was my first experience with like a larger Arab community. Um, and I think more importantly, a larger Arab community that was politically invested, whereas in the past it had been, something that you kind of maintained for cultural preservation, but you didn't really get into the politics of it. And so I started kind of interrogating like where can I kind of like work within Palestine and the Levant and politics, and like where does that fit in with dance? Because it felt really relevant because first of all, I was clearly racialized all the time because that's
Yeah.
just how dance Western dance culture is. But then also, you know, you can't really be in modern dance without like knowing that there's a huge Zionist presence at all times. And that was never really something that I brought up. And I always wondered why people didn't bring it up. And then once I did, I learned why. And it's because it is very, very unpopular if you bring it up. So I graduated and I was talking about Zionism in modern dance, and I started writing about it. And that got a lot of backlash, but I was like, well, I'm not going to stop writing about it. This is clearly something
Right.
important to me. But I had never really taken academic classes. I didn't really know that you could get a PhD in performance studies or in dance or anything like that. I had just done like more of a conservatory style training. So then I thought, you know what, I'm going to see if I like school and if I want to do this. So I did my master's, and then I enjoyed it enough. And then I went for the PhD. But I also like the whole time I feel like when I'm doing like work artistically, it's like alongside organizing. I think that feels like they feel very much like indebted to one another. So like I think that it's pretty common that as an organizer, I'm asked to downplay the dance side because people see dance as something that's kind of frivolous. Um, but I think that's a super Western concept, and like dance has such a political urgency. Um, especially in Palestine. And so I kind of blend them together, and I try and do that because it feels wrong not to have, these cultural assets used for what they are, and that's their political potency.
That's beautiful. That's really well put. They are such assets and they can be deployed as such. Um, and I see that in the work that you do here in the Bay. Um, in the description of this talk and in different ways that I've heard you talk about dances, I've heard you use the term dances of resistance and referring to indigeneity in dance. And I know too that you dance for El Juthur of the Arab diaspora, our premier debut troupe here in the Bay, and really one of the
At
most important
Temescal.
at Temescal Arts Center. And but really, like I think what Al Jathur is doing is really setting like such a beautiful conversation around dance as part of resistance, dance as part of cultural advocacy, agency, and resistance. And so I just would now like to hear you sort of speak on how you define indigeneity in dance and how you sort of construct or define dances of resistance. Like, what are some other examples, or how do you place Debki in this process, or how do you place Debki today in this process versus historically? Just a bit about maybe where your research lies in that.
Yeah, I think that's like such a big question too, because this dances of resistance has become sort of like a buzzword that you hear everywhere. And
Yes.
people are starting to say like resistance as, you know, when everything is resistance, nothing is resistance.
Mm.
So I think it's pretty important that we never become like complacent in that. But also what's really nice about Debge is that, well, its roots come from indigeneity. So the dance comes from like BC times, like you're talking, mud roofs, and the story behind it is that there were mud roofs, and people would jump on the roofs, and they would stomp their feet all together in unison, and to kind of put it compact so that the mud would get compact together so that it wouldn't break through. And then over time there was song and there was dance incorporated into it, to keep each other warm. They would link arms and sing and dance together. And so we saw that kind of start to cement itself during resisting the Ottoman Empire. But it wasn't really until the Zionist occupation that it became much more commonplace. But I always say that with a caveat because, like a dance of resistance, yes, it is indigeneity, but that isn't the only way to resist. I mean, even Debge, like originally it was danced by peasants, and if you were upper middle class, you wouldn't dance it. It was kind of like taboo to dance it. Whereas now it's something that has this huge political potency, and part of that is that when Israel started to form in the 40s, the first thing they did was they spent a ton of money and a ton of energy in the Ministry of Culture, and one of their biggest things was we need to find a folk dance. And there was this Israeli dancer named Gurit Kadman, and she was instructed to find a dance genre that could be Israeli. But she, even in early Zionist records, like because the thing with Zionist records is that they talk very blatantly about colonialism. It's not really hidden at all. And so she talks about how she wants to form this dance that is really hard to form because cultural dance, and there was like a kind of an era of studying folk dance in Germany and in Europe during this time where they had started like kind of writing out what the criteria for folk dance was, and that the criteria was that it had to develop over time, and there couldn't be a single author over it, and it had to develop naturally with changes that are really organic. And so they were faced with this dilemma of, okay, we're a nation state that's trying to form out of thin air, basically, and we don't want any of our European signifiers. We want something new, but it can't be a folk dance if we create it from nowhere. So at first, they started appropriating the debge. And what they would do is that they would frequently use it in like right after around 48, like 48 to probably 52, they had this massive annual world folk dance competition. And debge was always featured as the dance that they chose to do. And when they did it, they particularly drew on this imagery of the biblical stories of the Egyptians being driven out by the Israelites, and they kind of synonymized all Arabs with Egyptians, and this became like a triumphant story of Debge used against us. So it was them dancing an appropriated dance to celebrate, violently colonizing us. Um, Now, then there was a kind of a shift during the 60s, 70s when the PLO starts realizing just how potent the arts are. And so they start really embracing it, and it becomes a huge force and they can't control it. So then they start censoring it because Israel, citizens or whatever, settlers, they never really took to the debge like we did because it's our dance. It's what we do, and you can't, the body doesn't lie. You can't take that away.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, so they start dancing it everywhere all the time. But the other thing is that they're censoring it so much within Palestine, and Palestine is starting to become so like, people can't talk to one another.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts
Mm-hmm.
spreading from the refugee camps. and then it becomes this force that they can't control at all. And then there's this kind of dialogue between Palestinians in Palestine and Palestinians through the diaspora. And so you have this communication, and that if that isn't resistance, I mean, I don't know what it is. It's indigeneity, but it's also it's like I was talking about Zarif Al-Tul, the song where Zionists, when they heard this song, it's one of the most classic Debke songs. It's like it's about, the Zionists thought, oh, this is a song about a tall, handsome man. And it's like, yeah, well, he is a tall, handsome man, whatever. But it's actually a whole metaphor for, singing out to the diasporic community. Like, if you leave us, you'll forget Palestine and you'll never fit in wherever you go. And so that's one of the main songs that we dance to, because it is this dialogue between the diaspora and Palestinians in Palestine saying, don't forget the cause, don't forget the resistance. We are indigenous to this land and we will remain loyal to it.
That's intense. That's so it's an infuriating course of events, but it's so important that those incursions are recorded and that those histories are shared. Like, I feel like we aren't watching the appropriation of culture in the same way that we're watching the appropriation and corruption of land when we talk about the illegal state. So this is really important, and I wonder how, and this is like off the topic of questions I'm going to I have written down for us, but I wonder how difficult it was to do this research. Like, was this actually in some way recorded by like Western sources or Israeli sources, and looking at their validation practices for themselves, or like how was this how was this research process for you?
Yeah, I think so. Before I got into like kind of the academic sphere, I was really just noticing it. I would say like there are multiple layers to it. So there's the layer of I don't actually have a word for, like, I call it ghosting, but like it's not, like, that's not actually what it is. It's when Zionists post something online that's really blatant and, appropriative. And then whenever I'd call it out, then it would just vanish from the internet. And suddenly it wasn't there. It had never been there before. So one of
Yeah,
the
that's a thing. There is a word. There must be a word for that by now because it's such a common practice.
yeah, in my head it's ghosting, but
Yeah. Well, we can use that word. I think it's appropriate.
So over time I did learn like certain hacks, and one of those hacks was like screenshot everything, keep it in a file.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that comes with my research is that, like, no matter who I am, how much, like, I can't tell you how many times, even people that I've known for years who have known that I've been, dedicated to this for, I'm not that old, but like most of my life, they still will be like, you don't actually know what you're talking about. You're not qualified. So I think that with my research comes an added layer of me having to prove myself. And that means that, like my professor the other day said something like, you don't need this many footnotes for a conference paper. And I said, okay, if we go to this conference and not a single person questions me, then I will take the footnotes out. However, if they do, then it's just the fact that this is how I have to exist. I have to have a hyperlink, and I have to use Zionist hyperlinks a lot of times just for that to even have validity. And I have thoughts about that. So there's that layer, but then there's also this layer of Zionists in modern dance are huge. And so a lot of, well, the early records of Debgate, you're going to find like European traveler accounts, like pre-Israel existing. And it's usually like Napoleonic stuff of being like, wow, they were stomping their feet a lot and they like made this weird sound with their mouth. Which is, you have to like
Right.
skim through that and read all that. But then there's also a layer of like the Zionists have written down, like they've codified things. As soon as they started doing Debke, when they started doing it, Gert Cadman records it. She says that she goes to this meadow where she sees Palestinians dancing it. And at this time they were Palestinians. They weren't just Arabs at the time, but she watches them and she records it and she writes it meticulously and she does lab annotation so that she can
Oh,
record.
wow.
So
Okay.
then
But
she
she actually
opens.
calls these folks in the meadow, Palestinians.
Yeah, because there was a period of time where they weren't claiming indigeneity. Like there was
Right.
revisionist
Totally.
Zionism and
Totally.
expansionist Zionism.
Absolutely. I just love that that's like it's in writing in so many places that's how this settler agenda began as such. Um yeah, it's so wild how recorded that is even in Western texts and that we still have to like convince the world to the
Oh,
other.
it's remarkable. I mean,
It's remarkable.
it's pretty wild
Yeah.
colonialism, but also like there is some kind of, I don't know, pride in that it's not well there are like some Arabs that write about it, but there's also this degree of like secrecy around it, of
Mm.
like an awareness that it's going to be co-opted and taken from us. So there's like sometimes you'll find things where it's like I taught it just a little bit off because I don't want them
Mhm.
to have it. You know what I mean?
Beautiful. Beautiful. I
And
love
that's
that.
another resistance. I mean, like
Yeah,
there's forms of
absolutely.
resistance. So
Yeah, it's like inserting secret codes, secret handshakes into the thing.
oh yeah, absolutely. And even
Yeah.
like even the tattoos, it's on like
Oh,
different,
right.
costuming and stuff, that these are all
Totally.
like conveying messages, especially in the 60s, 70s, where that became like kind of paramount. And then also like it's just it's done at weddings and celebrations, but it also becomes really commonly danced at protests and
Hmm.
even early records of the protests. It's kind of funny because um you'll read and like the settlers will say like they're doing this, they're dancing and they're celebrating. Why would they celebrate? Because they don't know that we don't dance just for celebration, but also that it's totally not legible to them. And there are people who have talked about how they've gotten through checkpoints because they just confused the settlers so much by doing Debke that they were like, okay, like, like so many forms of resistance in this.
I
It's
love that.
incredible.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, maybe now's a good time to launch into like the gritty topic of Zionism specifically in the field of modern dance. Which the first time I heard you speak on this was in December of 23 at Bandaloop Studios in West Oakland. And I came in late and I only caught like the last
Ooh.
I didn't know what was happening, and I was on my way somewhere. And Wael, who's the director of Al Jathur, he texted and said, "Layla's doing a talk on Zionism and modern dance at Bandle." I like got out of the BART train going to San Francisco, cross the line, come back down. Like I was like called an Uber, tried to get there. So I got there as soon as I could. Anyway, I missed sort of the framing, the early framing in the talk that you did, but I think I got some like really good points that made me as a person who also came up in concert dance and modern dance, in like a conservatory, semi-conservatory setting through academia. Um, of course, I sniffed out the Zionism from the start, like it's there. And of course, it was not addressed, certainly not in the 90s. We didn't have the language for it. I didn't have the language to name it. And I don't think personally, and I don't, the ethos around dance and dance studies um, and even interrogating the form outside of technique was really sort of still forming, still in its early iterations. And so to hear you speak on these sort of like modern dance legends and elders in our Western field and to place them in this like sort of Zionist history, a Zionist fact of the forming of modern dance, I was like, yes, I knew it, but I don't like I never knew it, but I knew it. So short of just wanting to hear the entire lecture front to back right now, if there's some things you want to share in the context too of being part of FLAC and being part of this, dance festival situated in a modern dance city, so to speak,
Mhm.
or shall we say contemporary dance, or shall we just say dance? Um, yeah. So I don't know, just some talking points that you think are relevant specifically, like today or historically.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've been thinking about lately is that that was a talk I gave on like October 10th. I was like it was a redone talk that got a lot of backlash. Um and so in it I think one of the most interesting things was that the dance union posted just like I think it was like 45 seconds. It might have been like 2 minutes, but it was an hour long lecture, and we just did a little clip. And people's comments were really interesting. I actually didn't even read them, but I had friends send me like screenshots of some of the ridiculous ones. And one of them was Wendy Perrin, who's like a dance critic. And her argument, I think, is very telling because I think it speaks to the same history that we're talking about. And it's that she was upset that I was, I mean, honestly, the comment didn't really make a ton of sense. I didn't think it was very coherent, but it was something that was making the argument that, I wasn't centering the kinesthetic bodily experience of doing Graham, and that Martha Graham had brought a lot to the dance world and a universal language. And to criticize anything that Martha Graham did was, setting the dance movement back. And then there were a lot of other comments about like, this is people's livelihoods and you're taking away from people's livelihoods. Like,
Oh,
I think
wow.
that one's especially offensive, especially now as we're in the 180, 190,000 murders. But so I won't even give that one breath. But
No, no, that's
yeah, but the other one I find is very interesting because like I could say that I grew up doing Graham technique, which is entirely accurate. Like I was a Graham kid and I loved it. But
yeah,
like
yeah. We all were.
also
Yeah.
that's not relevant at all because dance has material repercussions, and the truth of our founders of modern dance. And I can't, and she was also saying, well, this person does it more. And I was like, well, that whataboutism isn't really relevant because what I'm going to is the origins. I'm not talking about the worst person because I don't think cancel culture in that way is really interesting to me. Like just to say like this person really sucks, let's cancel them isn't enough. I want to like look foundationally at deconstructing what it is that we study and what it is that we like worship. And the founders of modern dance, like you can't understand the foundations of modern dance without realizing that it is the appropriation of Black and indigenous dances, as well as uplifting these settler colonial projects and these like kind of Cold War agenda issues. So you look at Ruth St. Denis, you look at Ted Shawn, you look at Martha Graham, and you know, when we learned dance history, I don't know if they're teaching it differently now, but we went through the founders, and all the founders fall under these categories.
Yeah.
But Martha Graham was one of the first diplomatic projects for statehood recognition. So whether she was aware of it or not, she was entirely indebted to Israel, and she believed in the settler colonial project. And she writes quite enthusiastically about how she believes in this project because it reminds her of America and specifically of Manifest Destiny,
Mhm.
which is why one of her works that was so popular was this idea of the frontiers. Like that was her whole thing, was taking up space. And
Right.
it-
Americana.
yeah, it was pioneering and
Yeah.
like they are the pioneers of American modern dance. That's what they did, and land is no exception to that. And sometimes we kind of just gloss over that fact. So beyond like appropriation and beyond our founders being obsessed with Israel and the fact that Israel is one of the biggest places to study modern dance, is this other idea of this form of like exchange exists at an asymmetry, because
Mm.
I'm kind of just going at the most like common arguments I get so I can just
Yeah.
get rid of them.
Yeah.
And the
So,
next one is like, why don't you just not look at any modern dance in the US then? And that makes sense kind of,
mm.
but not really. Like it makes sense on like a super, like if we just look at everything as neutral, it would make sense. But it does, like, Israel spends a ton of money, and after every single genocide that they have ever committed in all of history, one of the first things that they do is they put a huge thing towards the arts. And that's where Brand Israel came from. That was showing Israel's prettier side, was the actual, slogan of it. And it's also worth mentioning that those were, consultants that were in the US and out of Europe. Like these are all
like
connected.
media consultants and
Yeah.
marketing consultants and branding experts and yeah.
Oh yeah. And so
Yeah.
like dance
Yeah.
is like if we don't like if we want to say that dance is apolitical or dance is above politics because it's universal, we're just ignoring the fact that it is actually very much indebted to colonialism. Um, and when we do that, it also negates the fact that, we apply for grants because dance is political. And then when we're like, oh yeah, dance is political, people freak out and suddenly dance is universal and it builds bridges.
So turning to the future. So knowing that like all eyes for us in the resistance are on the future and how we can build strength for our community and how we can work towards liberation and for a liberated Palestine. And also talking about dance and its role. I feel like we've touched on a lot of things. Do you feel like um, the conversations around dance and dance as a cultural asset, as you said, which I love, and dance as being like deployed in resistance. Do you think that that is happening on the streets in the vernacular, like in the communities, like here at TAC and at the marches and at the gatherings, or do you feel like or do you feel like it's also happening in academia? Is there an active decolonization that's happening in dance studies that is helping with like the future of dance that is a little more just and based in a just world or a hopeful world or a liberated view?
I think that with resistance, I think one thing I get nervous about is that resistance is going to become something that everybody says and that we forget what resistance means, especially for Palestinians in Palestine, and that we don't it doesn't become subdued into let's dance debke and not support armed resistance and the right to that. But also I
Right.
think that in terms of I think like what we're doing at TAC and at like protests and things like that, I think that's I was saying this the other day in rehearsal. I said like sometimes we perform and it feels like brilliant and it feels wonderful because it's around other Palestinians and other Arabs and like we're doing this thing. And sometimes it feels like something was taken away from me.
Mm.
And it depends on the audience and it depends on, how legible we are to them. And there's a degree of like not having to be legible for them, but also there's a degree of like not feeling like audiences are appreciating the depth of this dance and like we can have fun and we can do it, but that's because we don't really have the opportunity necessarily to dance or to live life only when we want to. Like we have to live life where we can take it. And so I think it certainly can, and I think it's being fostered with a lot of the work we do because we are so adamant that what we say yes to and what we say no to is like in line with our values, which I think is really important and not something I found in a lot of Dipke spaces in my past. This is pretty unique. I
It
always
is.
found it in like cultural things. It was like, let's just do it for cultural, try and stay apolitical. Um, so that's something that I really, really value about this space. But
Yeah.
I would say in terms of like I worry. I think that it's like on us. It's up to us. Like I think years ago, if I was talking about this, it wouldn't be as popular as it is, but also it's not very popular now. Like
Yeah.
like it's really, really hated. And I would love for like it not to be like I would love for us to candidly talk about this, but um academia I think showed really like some promise, but there's
Mm.
there's something I was telling somebody recently that it's like a Pokemon complex in like neoliberal society where people like just want to catch it. Like I said, got to catch them all. And like you meet somebody that's doing Debke and then like you suddenly that becomes like your next grant or your next like project and it's
Oh,
a
so
phase thing.
true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
like
that's the thing.
the
There.
Palestinian movement, you're in it for life. Like you don't get to leave. Like
Yeah,
you life and
yeah,
death, whatever.
yeah.
So I don't know. It makes me a little nervous because I think in academia, people either used it for like sometimes they use it for leverage into other spaces, or they use it, or they, flee from it and they're terrified of it and they won't touch it. Or they'll tell you, they'll whisper it to you, like, I support you, but I'm not going to be anywhere. And we don't really have that privilege of going in and out of it. So um I think that there are some people that it's opened their eyes and they're going to be like lifelong organizers for Palestine, and that's great. But I also think that we can't like celebrate too soon. We have to really keep holding
Absolutely.
people accountable on that front.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's solid. That is solid. Um, and I think, yeah, I mean, that's Samud, right? That's like our steadfastness is exactly that. It's like it's unwavering. It's an unimaginable steadfastness that will take us where we need to go. And so I think the folks that are like transient in the cause or Pokemon Pokemon about it, they'll fall off at some point, and we will still be standing and dancing and fighting. So I do know that's true. So we can at least know that we'll have each other in the world. And we do pick up the right people as we go. So it's good. So that's why, well, I think this is a good place to close. This talk's really so generous of you to share your research and share your thoughts and share your work with us, Leila. And now I want to give a shout out to Flack and Liz. Come back here. Hi, Liz. For being a steadfast warrior in the cause. And
I want to just
yeah,
respond to that because I'm like she's talking to us, and I mean in some ways, a solidarity project. Like every time I go to any cultural event at all, if I don't hear some kind of land acknowledgement for Palestine right now, people acknowledgement for Palestinians right now, it just feels like I shouldn't be there, and it feels wrong. Um, so that I'll just say that that is why I didn't really have much of a choice to, dedicate FLAC this year to our solidarity and so many bridging struggles for the immigrant community of
yeah.
FLAC, especially. Anyway, thank you so much. You both are such brilliant and incredible humans, and I've learned an incredible amount. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Liz. Thanks, Layla.